There is a general store in the Arizona desert where the man who ran the town was shot dead behind his own counter, and nobody was ever charged. There is a tree, still standing, that a mining camp used for frontier justice so often that historians still argue about how many men actually died on it. And there is a town where a family of four was murdered in the desert and burned to hide the evidence. On the order of a man everyone in town was too afraid to name out loud. All three of those places are real. They are still standing. And all three are on this list. Stay until the end, because the last entry is the one that Arizona historians still can't fully explain. And it is not the one you're expecting. Arizona has somewhere around 200 ghost towns scattered across its deserts and mountains, most of them left behind when a mine ran dry, a spring stopped flowing, or a railroad simply chose a different route. Most of those towns are just quiet piles of adobe and rusted tin, the kind of place you could drive past without noticing. But a few of them carry something heavier: a documented murder, a mass hanging, a massacre, a mystery that historians are still arguing about. We verified every name, date, and location in this list against real historical sources before writing a word of it. So what you're about to hear is history first and mystery second. Today, we're counting down 17 of the strangest, darkest, and most forbidden ghost towns in the state, starting with the mildest and building to the one story Arizona would almost rather forget. If you're the kind of person who likes their history with a little bit of a chill in it, go ahead and subscribe before we start and drop a comment telling me what state or country you're watching from tonight. I like knowing how far this stuff travels. Number 17 is Hackberry, sitting quietly along Old Route 66 in Mojave County. Hackberry began in 1874 as a silver mining camp, and for a while it looked like it might become something significant. It didn't. The silver played out fast, the miners moved on, and the town nearly vanished entirely, until Route 66 tourism gave it a second life decades later. Today, the restored Hackberry General Store stands almost like a museum piece, packed with old license plates, road signs, and Route 66 memorabilia, but the ground underneath it remembers a boom that lasted only a few short years before the silver claims simply ran out. It's a gentle place to start this list. Nothing violent, nothing unsolved, just a quiet reminder of how quickly a mining rush could rise and fall in this part of the country. But the next stop has a street that looks like its residents just got up and walked away mid-sentence. That's Lowell, just outside Bisbee, once a thriving extension of Bisbee's copper mining boom. Lowell's main strip, Eerie Street, is lined with mid-century storefronts, vintage cars, and an old bus, all left in place as the town emptied out. Visitors consistently describe the same feeling. It doesn't look abandoned so much as paused, like everyone simply vanished mid-shift and never came back for their cars. Nobody disappeared, of course. The mine work dried up and people moved on like they did everywhere else. But few ghost towns in Arizona managed to look this frozen in time. From a street frozen in time, we moved to a hotel that was drained of the very thing that built it. Number 15 is Agua Caliente in La Paz County, a town that wasn't born from a mine at all, but from a natural hot spring, used for centuries before American settlers arrived. By 1897, a 22-room resort stood on the site, drawing travelers who believed the mineral water could cure everything from arthritis to bad lungs. Then farming operations in the surrounding valley pulled so much water out of the ground that the spring that built the town simply ran dry. The resort collapsed along with it, and today, only stone ruins and a pioneer cemetery mark where people once soaked in water that no longer exists. In a landscape so dry now, it's hard to believe a hot spring was ever there at all. A town killed by drought is unsettling enough. The next one was killed by its own paperwork. That's Tip Top, tucked in the hills north of Phoenix. Founded in 1880 on a promising mineral strike, Tip Top drew a fast rush of prospectors, and just as fast a collection of adobe buildings and open shafts. By 1916, the ore was gone, and so was the town. What's left today is close enough to Phoenix that you can visit in an afternoon, wander past crumbling walls and old mine openings, and feel the particular quiet of a place that never got the chance to grow old gracefully. From a short-lived boom, we move to a camp that collapsed the moment its founder did. Number 13 is Kentucky Camp in the Santa Rita Mountains south of Tucson. It started in 1874, after a gold strike drew in hundreds of miners, many of whom named the surrounding gulches after their hometowns back east, which is how Kentucky Camp got its name. The gold thinned out by the 1880s, but the camp found new life in 1904 when a mining company built the stone structures that still stand today. That revival didn't last. The company's founder died suddenly in 1905. The operation lost its footing without him, and by 1910, the camp was abandoned outright. It's one of the few Arizona ghost towns where you can trace the town's death almost to a single funeral. The next stop replaced its miners with mannequins. That's Castle Dome, west of Yuma, once a booming mining district dating back to 1878. Today, it's been restored into one of the most complete ghost towns in the state, with more than 50 buildings rebuilt to look as they did in their prime. A saloon, a schoolhouse, a doctor's office, all furnished as if the residents had just stepped out. Some of them staged with mannequins acting out scenes from daily mining life. It's an unusual choice for a ghost town. Instead of leaving the decay alone the way most sites do, someone decided to repopulate it with silent, unmoving figures standing exactly where the living once stood, frozen mid-task in period clothing. Walk past enough of them in the fading light, and you'll understand why some visitors say the restoration is almost more unsettling than the ruin would have been. From stage stillness, we go to a town now overrun by animals instead of actors. Number 11 is Oatman, near the California border along Old Route 66. Two miners struck a rich gold vein here in 1915, and the town boomed almost overnight. It didn't last cleanly. A fire in 1921 tore through downtown and destroyed most of the original buildings, though the two-story adobe Oatman Hotel survived and still stands. What makes Oatman strange today isn't the fire scars. It's the wild burros that wander freely through the streets, descendants of pack animals turned loose by prospectors who never came back for them. They outnumber the human residents by a wide margin, ambling through a town that technically stopped needing them over a century ago. Speaking of towns that refuse to fully die, the next one built a fake ghost town inside a real one. That's Chloride, in the Surbit Mountains north of Kingman, generally considered the oldest continuously inhabited mining town in Arizona, founded on a silver strike in the 1860s. Chloride never fully emptied out. It still has a small population today, but decades ago, residents built a deliberately fake Old West set called Cyanide Springs right in the middle of the real town, complete with a saloon, jail, and blacksmith shop that were never actually used for their stated purpose. So you have a genuine 19th century mining town, still breathing, with a manufactured ghost town stitched into it like a movie set that never got torn down. The next entry didn't need a fake set. It had real gunfire in its streets. Number 9 is Swansea, in western Arizona's La Paz County, named by its founder George Mitchell after his hometown in Wales. Serious mining began here in the mid-1880s, and by 1909 the town had a post office and a population climbing towards 750, complete with a car dealership, a theater, and an electric light company sitting improbably in the middle of the open desert. Water had to be piped in from a river nearly 4 miles away just to keep the town running. Mitchell oversold the town's future so aggressively that when the promised growth didn't materialize, Swansea's collapse came fast, propped up briefly here and there before finally finishing off during the Great Depression. Dozens of buildings still stand today under protection by the Bureau of Land Management, a monument to a boom that was mostly built on a founder's exaggeration rather than the ground beneath it. From a town undone by its own hype, we move to one undone by a flood underground. That's Fairbank, along the San Pedro River near Tombstone, established in 1881 as a railroad stop supplying Tombstone's mines. Fairbank thrived as a supply and shipping point for years. Its story ends quietly compared to some on this list. The mines it served eventually gave out, but the cemetery on the mesa above town is what stays with most visitors. Rows of simple graves overlook the empty riverbed, a plain reminder that behind every abandoned schoolhouse and general store were real families who lived and died there. The next town's jail has a much more direct connection to the darker side of frontier law. Number 7 is Gleason in southeastern Arizona, once home to a turquoise mine reportedly favored by Tiffany and Company in the 1880s. Gleason's 1910 jail served as a temporary holding site for prisoners being transported to Tombstone for trial, and the building still stands today, restored and open as a small museum. The town also had a hospital that operated until the late 1930s, treating miners for the routine and not-so-routine injuries of frontier mining life, along with a 2-story schoolhouse that once educated the children of a town now reduced to a handful of scattered ranches. What remains now is mostly private ranch land, a collapsing general store, and that jail, a small stone reminder of how thin the line was between law and lawlessness out here. Just up the road sits a town that couldn't survive without the very lawlessness Gleason was built to contain. That's Charleston, along the San Pedro River just west of Tombstone, built in 1878 specifically to mill silver ore for Tombstone's mines. As Tombstone grew wealthy and wild, Charleston inherited the same reputation for lawlessness, becoming a known hideout for outlaws, including Frank Stilwell, later linked to the killing of Morgan Earp. By 1879, the town had grown to around 40 buildings, but its fate was tied entirely to Tombstone's mines. When those mines flooded in 1886, Charleston had no reason left to exist, and within 3 years, it was essentially gone. Today, only a handful of adobe ruins remain of a town that once sheltered some of Arizona's most wanted men. And speaking of Tombstone itself, its most famous building has a reputation that historians handle very carefully. Number 5 is Tombstone, the single most famous ghost town in Arizona, forever tied to the 1881 gunfight near the OK Corral involving the Earp brothers and Doc Holliday. Tombstone is what's called a living ghost town. It never fully emptied and still has residents today. A working town that simply kept its Old West storefronts intact, but its most talked about building is the Birdcage Theater, which operated nonstop for years through Tombstone's wildest stretch and has since built a reputation as one of the most rumor-heavy locations in the American West. To be clear about what's documented and what isn't, the gunfight, the outlaws, and the theater's rowdy history are all well-recorded fact. The ghost stories attached to it are folklore, repeated by tour guides and paranormal shows, not verified history, and it's worth knowing the difference, even in a town built on legend. From the most famous ghost town in the state, we move to one nicknamed for a reputation it apparently earned honestly. That's Jerome, perched dramatically on the side of Cleopatra Hill above the Verde Valley, once known as the wickedest town in the West. Jerome grew explosively around copper mining starting in the 1870s, eventually becoming a genuine boomtown with saloons, brothels, and a reputation for lawlessness that outpaced even some of its more famous neighbors. Before the mines finally shut down for good in the 1950s. What makes Jerome physically strange, verifiably, is the ground itself. The entire town was built on such unstable, mine-riddled terrain that structures have slowly slid downhill over the decades, including the old jail, which now sits noticeably displaced from its original foundation, having crept more than 200 feet from where it was originally built. It's one of the rare ghost towns where the geology itself is quietly trying to finish the job that the mine's closure started decades ago. The next entry involves a killing, where money, not geology, buried the truth. Number 3 is Ruby, near the Mexican border west of Nogales, once home to more than 1,200 people and the site of Arizona's largest lead and zinc mine. Ruby's darkest chapter came in the 1920s, when the town was the scene of 3 separate double homicides that came to be known collectively as the Ruby Murders, a documented, well-recorded string of killings tied to robberies at the town's general store, which sat isolated enough near the border that help was never close by. Unlike some of the folklore on this list, the Ruby Murders are historical record, covered in period newspapers and still referenced by the National Register of Historic Places, which lists Ruby today as one of the best preserved ghost towns in the state. It's a strange contrast to sit with. Over 24 carefully restored buildings, a schoolhouse, a jail, even ponds that now draw birdwatchers, all sitting quietly on top of one of Arizona's genuinely unsolved crime stories from a century ago. From one unsolved case, we moved to the town built almost entirely on a legend that historians have spent decades trying to separate from fact. Number 2 is Vulture City, northwest of Phoenix, near Wickenburg, built around what became the most productive gold mine in Arizona history. Discovered by prospector Henry Wickenburg in 1863, the Vulture mine eventually produced roughly 340,000 ounces of gold before closing for good during World War II, after the government ordered non-essential gold mining halted for the war effort. At its peak, Vulture City held close to 5,000 residents, along with boarding houses, saloons, a school, and a post office where Wickenburg himself served as postmaster. Standing among the surviving structures today is the site's most infamous feature, the hanging tree, an ironwood still standing near the ruins of Wickenburg's own cabin. Popular legend claims 18 men were hanged from that tree for stealing gold ore. Here's what's actually documented. In 1896, mine management did crack down hard on a wave of ore theft, resulting in firings and prosecutions that were real and significant. Whether all 18 hangings happened exactly as the legend describes is something historians openly dispute. The number was likely inflated over the following century to make the town's story more dramatic for visitors. What's true either way is that this was a genuinely lawless, isolated gold camp where theft was punished harshly, and the tree people still gather around today really did stand witness to some of it. We're not done yet. If you've made it this far, you might as well stick around for the story that even lifelong Arizona historians still argue about, because it's next. Before we get to it, if this kind of deep dive history is the thing that keeps you watching until the very end, this is usually the point where I'd ask you to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one of these. That brings us to number 1, Stanton, tucked into the base of Rich Hill north of Wickenburg, and the heaviest story on this entire list. Stanton began in the 1860s as Antelope Station, a stagecoach stop that boomed after a massive placer gold discovery on Rich Hill nearby. In the early 1870s, a man named Charles P. Stanton arrived, and through manipulation, bribery, and, according to most historians, orchestrated violence, gradually took control of the town's businesses, its post office, and even its law enforcement, eventually renaming the settlement after himself. By the time he was done, if you needed supplies, mail, a lawman, or a judge, all 4 roles in town somehow led back to the same man. Over the following years, several of Stanton's business rivals died under suspicious circumstances. The worst of it came in 1886, when a respected local miner named Barney Martin, his wife, and their 2 young sons were ambushed and killed in the desert outside town. Their bodies burned to destroy the evidence, in what's remembered today as the Martin family massacre. Stanton was arrested and questioned in connection with the killings, but was released for lack of hard evidence, and was never convicted of any crime in his lifetime, though multiple later witnesses, including a member of the gang believed responsible, reportedly confirmed his involvement after the fact. Only weeks after the massacre, Stanton himself was shot dead in his own store by a man avenging an insult to his sister, and no one was ever prosecuted for that killing either. The gold ran out by 1905, the post office closed the following year, and the town emptied out for good, leaving behind the store where Stanton died, a hotel, and a stagecoach station that still stand today as a private campground. Of everything on this list, Stanton is the one story where the darkness isn't folklore dressed up for tourists. It's a documented, unsolved massacre, an unpunished killer, and a town that never really recovered from either. 17 towns, 17 different ways the desert swallowed a place whole. Some slowly through drought or bad luck, some through fires and floods underground, a few violently, and at least one that still doesn't have real closure more than a century later. What ties almost all of them together is how little it actually took to end them. One dry spring, one flooded shaft, one bad winter, one man with too much power and no one willing to stop him. The desert didn't erase these places out of cruelty. It just never forgave a mistake. If there's a ghost town in your own state or country with a story like these, I want to hear about it in the comments because this is exactly the kind of history I'll keep digging into. Subscribe if you want to be here for the next one, and I'll see you at the next Forgotten Town.